Sorry, I should have said it in Spanish or Catalan. Huh? We're recording maybe later. During the lunch, I will explain it to you. And Catalan and Spanish, I can give you a huge lesson about that, but later, not now. So welcome. Wow, so, is it working properly? Yeah. So I'm going to present you a project that we are doing here entitled Physical Education, Health and Children. From now on, PEC, which is much easier. As you may guess, we are working with children and we are trying to improve their health, using the physical education lessons at school. Okay. This is a multidisciplinary project because, for example, I'm a biologist. I'm not physiotherapy, not a sports science girl. I'm a biologist. I have my PhD in childhood obesity. That's why we are working in children and health, metabolic parameters, obesity, cardiovascular diseases, etc. Raquel Fon is also a lecturer here at EUSES, and she's a sport science. She had her PhD in sport science. Blanca Romani is a medical doctor. She's helping us with all related with health, with Mediterranean diet, physical activity, because she's an expert of, correct me, Sergi, if I'm wrong, sport medicine, yeah? Sports medicine, yeah. And Azara, who is physiotherapist and a sports science. And we also have three PhD students. Okay? They are also teachers or lecturers here at EUSES, and all of them are physiotherapists. Okay, the objective of our project is that just study the effects of an integrated neuromuscle training on motor competence, because we are trying to improve fundamental motor skills. Are you sports science? Yeah. So you maybe understand much better this terminology than me. So you know that motor competence, we have to improve the motor skills of children, the fundamental motor skills. We want to study in the future. This is not, we have done the cross-sectional study, but we want to follow the students in a longitudinal study just to check if we can improve the adherence to physical activity programs. If we are improving motor competence of children, if we improve motor competence, in the future, they will be enrolled in physical activity programs. And also we are going to check the predisposition of obesity and comorbidities, the associated comorbidities, cardiovascular diseases, insulin resistance, obesity, etc. And we are working mainly in 8 years old children because it's much easier. We are working at schools. We are invading the schools. And we are just working in 8 years old children because it's just one class. Okay, it's much easier to try to do this project. I will show you a video later where you can see what we are doing with them. By now, we have 277 prepubertal children, 120 boys and 157 girls, around 7.5 years, and we are working with 5 schools. 2 schools from here, one is, okay, 2 of them are close to EUSES. It's much easier for us to work with the schools around here because of the proximity. And 3 of them are from Casada la Selva, that it's close to here, maybe 20 minutes far from here. And we are working there because the availability of the sample. This is a village where the mayor of the village is a medical doctor and enrolled in some biomedical research project. So it's much easier to reach a population where the mayor of the town it's a doctor, medical doctor. Okay. That's to do this project. At the beginning, we usually go to the town hall to ask the mayor if they want to perform this project in their community. If they agree, then we go to the school just to ask the directors and the management of the school if they want to participate, because we have to enroll the PE teachers in our project and change the schedule of the year, mostly. Okay. We also work with the public health system, because at the end of the project, we just deliver a report to each child, each family, with all the information that we obtain from each child related what physical activity that they perform, obesity parameters, cardiovascular parameters, all the information, all the variables that we obtain from each child. We just do a report and give it to the families. That's why at the end we need to enroll the pediatricians, okay, for the children or for the families mostly, if they want to have further information or just an explanation of the results from the child, they can go to the public health systems and they just help them to analyze or to know the results. Okay? So it's a huge project where we have all the community services involved: the school, public health systems, the town hall. What do we do? Okay, we just change or modify the P lessons. Okay, here in Spain, I don't know in Coventry, but here we just have 1 hour of physical education per week. How is about in your country? 2 or 3 hours per week. Okay, we are far from that. So we have to demonstrate that it's mandatory to try to increase the hours because of we are improving the health of the children. So we have just 1 hour, and here what we do is just to try to do 20 minutes 2 times per week during 3 months of this intervention. The intervention is just an integrated neuromuscular training where we work strength, resistance, and coordination skills. How we do that? Just with games and motor challenges. What we do is just deliver or give them some instructions and how to perform different tasks by using games. They are children, 8 years old children. If they are motivated, it's not a game if they don't perform properly the task. Okay, so we try to keep them enrolled in what they are doing using games. What do we collect? Before and after this intervention, we just collect a lot of data. Okay. For example, we obtain weight, height, waist, fat mass using bioelectrical impedance, you know? Yep. Then we just assess the posture of each child using photography, okay, in a frontal and lateral plane. Balance or postural control using WeFit. Okay. Motor skills. This is a Canadian assessment tool. Maybe you know it or you don't. I don't know. But this is a Canadian assessment tool just to assess the motor skills of each child. It's just a circuit. Okay. And you just score the time that they need to perform the task and the quality of the performed task. Okay. Then, using spirometry, we assess pulmonary function. Using accelerometers, we assess physical activity and also sleep. We are also interested in the quality and the quantity of sleep, because sleep, you know, that is related with obesity. Okay? As much time as you sleep during childhood is a protector of obesity. Diet, we assess the quality of Mediterranean diet. This is important because when we are working here in SAL or in CASA, we have all the children included. All the children that is in a school, we have different, different ethnics, different socioeconomic levels, and we have all the children included in our project. Okay, we are trying to translate all the information, all the ethics committee information. We have all the informed consent that we have to sign in Catalan, in Spanish, but we also have some translators just to translate it in Muslim or whatever, just to try to reach all the population that we have here. Okay? So it's important just to assess the quality of the diet, because you may guess that is very different depending on the origin, the country of origin of each child. We also assessed basic lipids using capillary puncture. Okay, it was funny because all the children were firstly scared. Okay, you are going to give some blood from me, but at the end it was easy because we said that it's like a mosquito, that it doesn't hurt anything. We also perform, that's a mistake. We also perform echography. We assess muscle elasticity, okay, and we just compare. It's funny because you went to assess the myofibrils or the muscle fibers between, for example, black and white children. You can see a huge difference in the disposition of those fibers. So this is a huge, this is the main result, and we have now to try to publish it. And also we haven't assessed it yet, but we have saliva and urine samples just to check the metabolism, because we want to assess, we want to check if this program can perform changes in the metabolism, mainly related with skeletal muscle. Okay, you know that the skeletal muscle is now considered an endocrine organ, so we want to check if there are some hormones secreted by the skeletal muscle, and we want to assess it in saliva and urine if we can find some biomarker that may help us to assess the quality of the skeletal muscle or the work that the skeletal is doing with muscle. Yeah, I have a video for you just to see, just to watch how we perform the data collection. Are you following me? that we do is just a game for them. We try to keep them involved using games, using, you have seen it, just a little circuit that they have to complete it at the end, just marking them if they have passed this a data collection a point, and well, that's all. You may imagine that we just invade literally the school during one day to just try to get all the data from each child. Okay, the entities, the main collaborator, of course, is EUSES. Then we also work with EDFG. EDFG is the Biomedical Research Institute that we have here close to the hospital. Okay. Here is where we have all the biomedical stuff that we need just to assess, as I said before, lipids, just to analyze urine, saliva, and everything. And General Electric is the one that gave us for free to assess the muscle elasticity. They gave us the echography, okay, the machine, and also the technician, the pediatrician, and all the staff needed to perform this to assess muscle elasticity in each child for free. So we are very thankful for that. And Elizabeth Disen is the one that helped us with all the dissemination of the study, just work on the video, the logo, and everything. Some collaborators that work here, that they are lecturers here in EUSES, that help us just to collect all the data, to organize everything. And the students, we are we have more than 30 students involved in the collection of the data. We just try to link our project, the collection of the data, with the practicum that they have to do, because it's just a formation, a research formation program. They are involved in everything, the organization, collection of the data, analysis of the data, everything. Okay? And thank you very much. If you have any question or you are something else, just ask me. Feel free to ask. Actually, just yesterday we received the panels. We are using panels just to assess myokines. You know myokines, that are hormones secreted by the skeletal muscle. And we yesterday received the tool to assess it. And I hope that by the end of next week, I will have the results just to know if we can assess those myokines in urine. I don't have an answer yet, but I hope that by the end of the next week, I will know at least if we can measure those hormones in urine. And if we can assess it, then we may try to find some biomarkers. But nobody has done it before. So I hope we can measure it in urine. I hope to give you an answer next week. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's a problem. No, it is advantage. But just from 277 children, we have less than 10 children, not 10%, 10. Yeah, that are actually obese. So we cannot check with our sample now if this is gonna reduce the obesity parameter. But at least we have waist, fat mass, and we can see a tendency in the reduction of this or elimination of those variables. But you are right. Maybe this is just to know if we are able to perform this, and in the future we will try to collect more specific population, for example, obese children or diabetic children or whatever, just to try to do. They are sports science, man, so maybe there are some specific programs, physical activity or exercise programs, just to try to improve those parameters. But as I said before, this project is for now just to check if we are able to find some biomarkers in saliva and urine in healthy children. If we get it, if we are able to find them, then we will work on a specific population just to validate all the methodology. Thank you. No, in fact, what we did is just IMC, BMI, sorry, yeah, BMI, and we standardized BMI by sex and gender, gender and age. And then you just obtain a value between -4 and 4, and you just say if they are around 0, they are normal weight, and if they have more than 2 points or 3 points, and this is for normal. If they are underweight, means they are less than mean. It's just, yeah, I know that nowadays BMI is not the best way to ascertain obesity, but it's the best we have by now. We are using also waist to hip ratio. That's a well-known cardiovascular marker. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, we have it, but we don't have normalization values. We cannot standardize them. We cannot compare 8 years old girl and boy because they are very different. Using BMI, if we standardize them using gender and age, we can compare. But only with fat mass, you know that girls and boys are different. They are a different body composition. And as far as I know, I don't have normative values in Spanish population just to standardize, for example, percentage of mass or whatever, and use them to compare children. That's the main point. That's why we use BMI instead of fat mass. But yes, fat mass is more close to obesity than BMI by itself. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, that's the main goal. In fact, it's just remove. What we want to do in the future is just to try to do it during 1 year. This is just 40 minutes in 3 months. If we really can change some metabolic parameters, we will be very happy because in just 3 months, 40 minutes per week, it will be great. But yes, what we want to do is just check if 1 year, if this program during 1 year can change more than one parameter, and at the end, the main goal would be that change the curriculum and try to give or to demonstrate that it's much better to perform 2 or 3 hours per week than 1 hour. But here, the problem that we have here, I don't know, but is that physical education lessons is more related about perform physical activity than to learn, for example, fundamental motor skills or some useful tools for you to develop or perform physical activity in the future, or different kinds of exercise or sports in the future. Yeah, but firstly we have to demonstrate that it's mandatory, that it's necessary for health. Yeah, that's a huge problem. Yeah, 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 sure, no worry. Yeah, yeah. In fact, we are not working just in PE lessons, but also in a subject related to human physiology, and we are just trying to teach them the benefits of physical activity, the improvement in their body health. We are trying for them to understand that it's important to perform physical activity as well as have a good diet. Okay? Not only child, but also the parents of the child. At the end of the study, what we do is just a meeting with the families uh, to give them the report that I've mentioned previously, and try to give them some results about the diet, physical activity, sleep, and give them some recommendations to improve all those variables in their own child. So we are trying to educate children and parents, okay? And we involve different subjects in school because we think that if they are able to understand the importance of being active, if they learn that at school, it's more easy that in the future they do something like that. Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We have 5 schools, and 3 of them are experimental group, and 2 of them are control. That they are performing the classical physical education. Yeah, 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 we have it. Yeah, yeah. I have it. Sorry. 7 days. Yeah, during the day and night also because we are testing sleep. Yeah, and they are wearing it 7 days, and we just use the data from 6 days because we have to plan it. Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah, and they can use it in water. So if they are swim or whatever, they can keep it active. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Any more questions? Or? We use CALP. This is a Canadian assessment tool. Uh, I'm not an expert because it's Raquel, the one that performed this kind of assessment. I cannot give you any kind of, sorry. But if you have any specific question, just ask me, and I will prepare and give you an answer. Yeah, I'm sorry, but I don't master this kind of things. I'm trying to understand them when they talk about sports science things, but I'm learning both of them. Yeah, the PE education, the teacher, and also Raquel, that the one mastering all that, and they always have 2 persons there. This is the first year. What? Yeah, yeah. The first year it was just for them to know how to apply this methodology. We expect in the future they will be able to do it by themselves. But we are now analyzing all the data just to see if there is a difference. We hope yes, and by the next year, if we have enough money to do it again, then we will check if they are able to do it by themselves. That will be much easier. If not, Raquel has to go to 5 schools, 20 minutes, and it's like going and coming all the time. Crazy, but at least we know that they did it properly. Related to marks of other subjects. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And certainly we tried to check it, but there we were not able to have access to those data. And if we have it, we don't know how to work with those data. We don't have a psychology. Maybe in the future we will have psychology in our group that can master and that can analyze of those, all the data. Yeah, that will be interesting. But it was like a hard work to collect of the data. We have to complain. We have to fill on a lot of forms just for confidential data. And at the end, it was like, okay, if I have the data, how I'm going to publish it if I'm not able to understand or to give an explanation of what's happening. But maybe in the future, we'll keep it in mind. If you are able to do it, we are happy for us to have it in our team. If we try to explain them what we are doing. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we try. Yeah. Yeah, it's hard and not all of them get it. But we tried because as I said before, the main point is just if they understand what they are doing or the benefits doing that, the objective for work will be accomplished. Because if you realize that what you are doing and the way you are doing that is the properly way to achieve healthiest whatever, that is the main point. That if they are able to understand that, they will be enrolled in more physical education programs in the future and the benefits that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. To understand it and to have change. Okay, if they are 8 years old, it's because they have enough cognition to understand what they are performing, and that's a window of opportunity where they can learn how to perform it. That it's about also myelinization, that you can integrate all the patterns, and also about metabolism. It's a window where there is a adipose rebound when that you can, if you can change the metabolic parameters at that age, then you can see a beneficial effect in adulthood. So it's a mix of a lot of things. The best would be between 6 and 9. That's the age when we can change the metabolic programmation, if you let me say, the programmation in metabolic parameters, in the metamotor skills, etc. Yeah. Yeah, but it's much difficult to work with 6 years of, yeah, for them to be quiet, to perform all the tasks that you are asking them. Uh, it's hard to work with 6 years of age. If it works with 8 years of age, maybe in the future we will increase the window 6 to 9. No, in fact, we are very happy because it worked very well. Limitations, yeah, always there are some data that you can collect because, for example, the children say, no, I don't want to do that. If they don't want, you can't. Yeah, yeah, but in general, yeah, if you keep them interested because you are doing a game for them, it works. Yeah, yeah. and it's a work from the beginning of the semester. It's just 3 months of intervention, but you keep them involved during all the year in these physiology lectures and in other subjects. Yeah, just reminding them what are they going to do. Yeah, that's good. So we move on to the next exhibition. Thank you very much.
Well, I want to present this short talk titled Cardiac Respiratory Coordination Reveals Training Specific Physiological Adaptation. Before starting the talk, let me explain the origin. This work started actually 1 year ago when your colleagues here, Martin and Martin, we shared different research projects, for example, the coordination project. After some nice discussion, we decided to start a new work. So we just start working till now, till the emergence of this new product, this new paper I'm about to present now. The team is composed by members of 5 different institutions. First, you know them, Martin Morris, Mark Moon from Coventry, okay? Then you know him, right? Then Thomas O'Leary from the US Army, but I think that you also know him. Not West UK. Then Natalia Balaguer and Robert Ristovsky from the University of Barcelona and the University of Skopje. And finally, Mariano and myself. Now this paper is under review in the European Journal of Applied Physiology. Well, let's start. I think that all of you guys know this widely used training methodologies, the high intensity interval training and the moderate intensity training. It is well known that HIIT could offer similar or even greater effects with some health and training parameters compared to training. However, it is unclear which is the best training intervention to improve aerobic fitness. In fact, some of the last published papers suggest that both HIIT and continuous are equally effective to improve markers of aerobic fitness, such as maximal oxygen consumption, threshold, maximal workload, ventilation, whatever. Some authors suggest that this lack of differences between HIIT and continuous to improve aerobic fitness might be related to a lack of sensitivity of VO2 max to specifically detect physiological adaptations after training. More specifically, some other authors suggest that how to explain this. the lack of sensitivity of VO2 max, other maximal parameters, although VO2 max and other parameters offers a huge amount of useful information, it seems that they offer a little information with respect to the coordinated activity of different physiological systems during exercise. And this guide is really important because, as you can see in this picture, the human organism is an integrated network where different organ systems continuously interact across different spatial and temporal scales. So it makes sense that if I want to accurately analyze the effect of a training intervention, I should measure the effect of this intervention on the connectivity between the different physiological subsystems within the exercise. So, given this background, with the aim to solve which is the most training intervention continues to improve aerobic fitness, we proposed a novel variable, cardiorespiratory coordination, from now CRC. We have published 2 papers regarding this topic, and the main results suggest that this variable seems to be more sensitive than VO2 max and other maximal threshold parameters to specifically detect physiological adaptations after training. And how do we calculate this cardiorespiratory coordination? We calculate it through a principal component analysis approach. Look, guys, this is a somewhat a complicated method, and I don't want you to learn it today, basically because it's impossible. So I need you to trust me. Okay, if I say you that cardiorespiratory coordination increases or decreases, why? Because we apply this method and we got the result. Okay, if you have interest, we can discuss it later or tomorrow or. So I'm going to skip this and this and this and this for your time. And let's go here. Okay. So the aim of this paper is to compare the effect of high intensity training and moderate intensity training matched for total work. This is important. Matched for total work on CRC, on cardiorespiratory coordination and aerobic fitness. Well, the data collection was done by you guys at Coventry University. 10 participants performed 6 weeks of HIIT training, and 10 participants performed 6 weeks more of continuous training. And before and after the training period, they performed a maximal exercise test to measure first aerobic fitness markers such as VO2 max, ventilation, threshold, etc. And second, CRC, cardiorespiratory coordination. And what did we find here? What did we find? So here you can see an example of one typical participant of continuous training. Here you can see the evolution of the physiological variable, pre-training and post-training. Participants in the continuous group significantly improved markers. What happened with the degree of connectivity between the lungs and the heart? Here, I'm sorry, vertical line indicates the occurrence of the second lactate threshold. Okay? In the first training, participants of the control group showed a low degree of connectivity, sorry, a low degree of CRC, I mean a low degree of connectivity between respiratory and cardiovascular system. This is explained by these 2 lines. Okay? Remember, you have to translate 2 lines mean low degree of CRC here. And what happens after the post-training continuum? Remember, we are in the continuum. Participants include CRC both before and after threshold. Okay? And this is explained by this signal line. Now just be again, one single line means that the coordination between respiratory and cardiovascular systems is high. Okay, so in summary, this group improved aerobic fitness after the training, and also improved CRC both before and after the threshold. Okay, now let's go what happened to see what happened with the heat group. Here again, we have the example of one typical participant of this group. Here again, the evolution of the physiological variables pre-training and post-training. What happened with aerobic fitness? Also improved, exactly like continuous. I mean, there were no significant differences in aerobic fitness markers post-training. This is also obvious. From now until now, nothing new. And what happened with CRC? Before the pre-training, the level of CRC was also low. Also low. Remember, 2 lines before and after the threshold, so low degree of CRC pre-training. And this is and now we are going to the key point of this paper. Changes on CRC post-training in the HIT group. Where did the group improve? Before or after the threshold? What do you think? After. Remember, we are tracking 1 line, 2 lines. Okay, then we can talk about what we mean 2 lines and 1 line. So, in summary, the HIT group improves aerobic fitness to a similar extent than continuous group, but only improves CRC after the threshold. I mean at high intensities. Let's go for the conclusions. We are about to finish. Although the continuous group and the HIT group show different patterns on change of cardiorespiratory coordination after the training period, remember, the continuous group improved CRC both before and after the threshold, okay, in a wide range of intensities, but it only improved after the threshold, I mean at high intensity exercise. Okay, so despite this fact, both groups increased the markers of aerobic fitness to a similar extent. And what does it mean? That changes in cardiorespiratory coordination might be specific for each training intervention. And what else? Given these results and those published previously, it seems that CRC analysis could be a more sensitive tool to investigate the individual cardiorespiratory response to exercise, training, and workload. And you can see, okay, what are the practical implications for that? We believe that the analysis of cardiorespiratory coordination alongside with the classical variables, the maximum variables, mass, threshold, maximal workload, ventilation, everything you want, could help to improve the interpretation of the cardiorespiratory exercise testing. We don't think that CRC is better. No, we think that CRC could offer a different type of information that could complement the information that currently offers EUSES. Okay, and specifically, we think that if you analyze the CRC with athletes, we can improve the interpretation of the effect of different training interventions, and thus the use of this kind of variables, like CRC, could help coaches to precisely select the most appropriate intervention. Okay. Well, I think that's all. I have this slide here just to explain you how do we introduce this research to our students. We always give them the opportunity to collaborate with us in different stages of the research process. Specifically, we give them the opportunity to collaborate during the data collection and data analysis. In this case, this student, Pera, collaborated very actively during the data analysis. think that's a very important opportunity for them to collaborate to learn. So, thank you. Questions, comments? Six variables: ventilation, excited fraction of oxygen, excited fraction of CO2, heart rate, and systolic and diastolic blood pressure. Good. And ventilation? This is a percentage. Excited fraction. It's a breath by breath measure, so I think it's an average of the different. I think this measure is an average. It's 10 breaths. It's 10 breaths. The device gives you an average of the 10. Of the, yeah, yeah, yes, yes. And we keep other variables like the VO2 max, because VO2 max and ventilation are really connected, and other variables like the ventilator equivalent, ventilation is not connected. So if we add more variables connected to these variables, this analysis could be changed. Actually, with the digital component, we are analyzing the clear covariation between different. So if we add here VO2 max, yes, please.
How does the match protocols? Is it
The intensity of the training. Total work by joules. Actually, the kid group performed a shorter time training. Okay, this was done by you at Coventry University, right? Not you, but your colleagues. So maybe we should ask this question to Martin Morris, but I think they calculated the total work of each training using kilojoules, and they made sure that each training group used the same amount of kilojoules after each training. But the work was measured by kilojoules, not time. Yes, not you, your colleagues progressed the intensity. I think they made two progressions during the 6 weeks period. I think they progressed the intensity and the volume each 2 weeks in both groups, continuous and HIIT training. The metabolic cost. Kilojoules. They measure the work, but I can't answer you this question because they're using a cycloergometer, but I'm not sure how do they measure. I think we should ask to Martin, but I think they match the total work of each group. I don't know exactly. I think we should ask to Martin. Here our working at EUSES was the data. Yeah, you guys collected the data. Yeah. Collected the data and we used the principal components to analyze some data that so so I can help you, I can answer you more questions connected to the data analysis instead of the data collection. Well, actually, that, let me show the graph. Okay. It's a very nice. Let me show you the. Okay. I don't have the question here. The variable responsible for the formation of the ecosystem component here was the spider function of O2. And the variable responsible for the formation of the second physical component after the transport is the spider fraction of CO2. So we connect the improvement here for the transport with an improvement on the ventilatory efficiency. I mean, you can see the line phase of the spider fraction of O2. Spider fraction is somewhat
Yes? Yes. Yes. That's totally right. Like, but how do we measure this? How we are seeking for other variables. We're working with different variables, focusing on this horizontal integration between organisms, because you know better than us. Exercise physiology is focused on the vertical integration between brain, neurons, and proteins. What happens with the connection between brain and heart? We are on it. Maybe in some months we will be able to give you some more information. No? Martin. Martin is easy. Well, so we also thank to you for sharing the data, and the result is thanks to you. So, anything else? Yes, please. We are on streaming and we need the microphone. I don't like it. Yeah, is it working?
Okay, so as I understood well, you say that you found a greater increase in performance post-training in HIIT training, isn't it?
So the aerobic fitness, I mean, the VO2 max, threshold,
So you
ventilation,
found a greater
the
improvement
improvement
in
were
HIIT.
equal between continuous and HIIT. I mean, both groups improved equally markers of aerobic fitness post-training. The only difference was in cardio-respiratory coordination.
Yeah.
The continuous group improved before and after the threshold, the second lactate threshold, and the HIIT group only improved after the second lactate threshold. And I think this makes sense because the HIIT group trained only near to the maximal oxygen consumption, and the continuous group trained
Right.
at intensity corresponding to the lactate threshold, I think, more or less.
But you also said that you had 20 participants and 10 of them followed a continuous exercise and 10 of them keep training. But what about genetic makeup? Because every person is different. Do you think the result would have been different if same population would have followed continuous and HIIT?
That's a sub-related question, but I don't know. As I said before, these are only the first steps. I think we should measure this kind of data with a much more bigger population, but I don't know. I think they were just students. Maybe were you? I don't know. Maybe were you? Yes, I think normal, active individuals, but not highly trained. Because as I saw in the data, the maximal values were not high. Were normal, like us, normal guys. Anything else? Yes.
Please explain like why you measured fraction of oxygen and fraction of carbon dioxide. Why change it between for that period?
In our first studies, we used these 6 variables, but in this study, in your study, in our study, in our work, we only use 4 variables. We only use ventilation, heart rate, target fraction of O2 and CO2. We didn't just on blood pressure because you guys Coventry did not measure it. Because recording the blood pressure in a continuous way it's really tricky. You have to use special device, and so we didn't use it. And your question is why we use these particular variables. The variables are the same, but yeah, the variables are the same, but when we use the we introduce this data to the principal component analysis. Before the here, the variable responsible for the formation of the new principal component, the second, is by extraction of O2. But here, in the analysis, we use all the variables. All the variables. Always we use all the variables. But depending on the moment of the test, depending on the symmetrics of the different variables, the result, the principal component is different. So here the responsible for the formation of the new PC principal component is the expired fraction of oxygen, and here the responsible of the formation for the new principal component is the expired fraction of CO2, carbon dioxide. But we include all the variables in the analysis. I think it's difficult to understand it without without understanding how the principal components work. For you to explain the mathematical basis for this today. I have the slides here, but I think we are in time. Better to move on to the second. We have information here explaining how do we calculate this disease and how to change the variation and the eigenvalues and the load of the disease. There is a rationale behind it. They are mathematics. But if you are interested in this, you can after. So we can move on to the next point. Yeah? Yeah? Now it's your turn. Jack. Like you all know him, but for my colleagues, he's a senior lecturer in applied human physiology at Coventry University. And he will give us a talk entitled, sorry. So, and Doug will present his project investigating physiological responses in extreme environments. Thank you, Doug.
Yep. Okay. Is that too? Is that too loud? Does that suit me? Are we picking that up? Crikey! Right. Goodness me. There we go. Right. Air traffic control. Right. Okay. So if I have to give myself a label, it would be an applied human physiologist. Purely from the point of view that the way I view all of this work and exercise physiology, sport and exercise science, it's a case of having a range of tools available that you can apply in different settings across a lot of different studies, rather than being a specific specialist in some areas. And I suppose the diversity of what I get up to is represented by some of the postgrad students I'm supervising, in that I've got one at the moment who's looking at supplementation in the heat. Another student I'm supervising is actually looking at motion sickness in automotive vehicles, in autonomous vehicles, a bit obscure. And a further student is beginning to look at the use of tilting somebody after head trauma in relation to their enhancing their consciousness. So we've got a diverse range of projects there, and I'm just highlighting that from the point of view for you guys, in that all of the methods, all of the application is the same. It's just the numbers are different, and the protocol and design around those studies is different, but the process remains the same. It enables us to look at these different things. So, sorts of things that I get up to and have got up to in the past, I've broken this up into sort of three main areas really. So work around altitude and hypoxia, obviously field-based as well as laboratory-based. And way back when, we did a lot of work looking at innate immune responses and oxidative stress when people are hypoxic. And amongst other things, you'll be aware of the window of opportunity to experience an opportunistic infection after exercise, where aspects of immune function decline. And we demonstrated that when people are hypoxic, the magnitude of that reduction and the duration of the reduction increases. So therefore, people are more susceptible when they're hypoxic. And you could argue that that translates to unhealthy people with a disease state where they're chronically hypoxic at sea level as well. Okay? So what we quite often do is take healthy people to high altitude, because they're a very good model for people with pathology at sea level in order to undertake this sort of work. Briefly mentioned actually, and this is related to what you're talking about, oxygen delivery and the control of delivery and the basics of that. And you know, we've demonstrated that different people respond differently. When there's a hypoxic stress or challenge, some people will increase their blood flow, some people will increase their ventilatory response. And that's really of interest. For example, if someone ends up in an intensive care unit and they're being managed in relation to their oxygen delivery around the body, if there's an awareness of that person's physiology, if it's driven by flow, if it's driven by ventilation, the support that that individual can receive could potentially be enhanced as a consequence of that. In the same way, with it's exactly the same principle in relation to the CRC that you guys are talking about. A lot of this work, we're interested in performance and metabolism as well. We've done work, for example, where we're looking at load carriage at altitude and acute mountain sickness, and we've demonstrated that it's actually better to be horrible to somebody at high altitude if they become ill, because what normally happens is when you're on a trek, somebody becomes ill, everybody takes their load and carries everything for them. But our data demonstrate if you do that, obviously you reduce their drive to breathe because their blood lactate is reduced, and as a consequence they become even more hypoxic and more ill. Whereas if you actually maintain, that load carriage, or ironically probably give them more, you will be increasing their respiratory drive, of course, which is what AMS is all about, from that perspective, amongst other things. We've also looked at carbohydrate supplementation in hypoxia as well, and the interaction there, because of course it's far more effective to metabolize carbohydrate whilst hypoxic than it is for fat, and so there are some differences there as well. But I'll mention this in a little bit. Some work we've recently done in the Antarctic, which people often forget is at a moderate altitude as well, because the Antarctic plateau is just under 3,000 meters of altitude. So it's exceptionally cold, of course, but we've also got this altitude challenge. So I'll elaborate on this one a little bit, seeing as we are in a physiotherapy department in some ways. So we've got here an Alter G treadmill, so body weight support, and work in this area arose from anecdotal evidence that professional football clubs were using Alter G during rehabilitation, and they were also using hypoxia in order to maintain some sort of cardiorespiratory training stimulus at the same time. But there was really no published evidence in order to demonstrate or characterize that. So we undertook a study to do that. It was only recently published, actually, where we basically exposed our athletes to, there we are, to different levels of body weight support. Okay, I think it was 60, 40 and 80 if I recall off the top of my head. And we wanted to compare their response in hypoxia compared to normoxia. Because classically, you know, we would know that, of course, if you make somebody hypoxic at a given level of work, it's a greater cardiovascular strain. You know, in the same way, at a given level of exercise, white load-bearing exercise, if you reduce the body mass, the ground reaction force, the metabolic cost of that exercise declines. But let's have a look at the combination and both of them together. And these figures are from that paper. And as you might expect, we've got oxygen saturation here, so the amount of oxygen in the blood effectively. In normoxic conditions, okay, this is no reduction in body mass, 30% and 60%. Okay, so more positive uplift on the treadmill. And we look at the figure to the right there. All this shows is the change in oxygen saturation from normoxia to hypoxia under each of these conditions. And the key thing here is that the reduction in oxygen saturation is actually reduced, as you might hypothesize, at higher amounts of body weight support, which makes sense intuitively because people are doing less work here. So at the same level of hypoxia they're breathing, there's actually more oxygen remaining in the blood. So that's actually less of a training stimulus, isn't it? Yeah? They're less hypoxic with more body weight support. Right? So I won't, these guys know that I can talk forever about these things, so I will be brisk and we'll just focus on that point for today because that's all we need. We've got here also, I'll highlight this one here. This is a proxy for oxygen delivery. So heart rate multiplied by the oxygen saturation gives us a oxygen delivery, a DO term, how much oxygen is being delivered to the tissues. And we can see here we've got the difference between normoxia and hypoxia, and the reduction, there's hardly a reduction in the amount of oxygen being delivered to the tissues at higher levels of body weight support, okay? Which makes a lot of sense from that point of view because metabolic cost is a lot less. So really, what we concluded from this, if we've got people making individuals hypoxic to maintain a training stimulus, at higher levels of body weight support, the stimulus is being reduced, yeah, the saturations are higher. So what we actually need to do is clamp the saturations to which people are exposed. So rather than expose everybody to 3,000 meters, we need to adjust that on an individual basis because everybody in the room, if we breathe at 3,000 meters, is going to have a different oxygen saturation. And obviously, if we want the body to adapt and maintain a certain stimulus, we might decide, well, we want saturation to be 80%. And for me, I might need to breathe 4,000 meters to get 80%. Somebody else, 3.5 or higher or lower. So it needs to be bespoke from that point of view and be efficient in order to do that, which is quite good practice and really what that paper highlights. So that's sort of bits and pieces in hypoxia. Did a lot of work, and we still do, in protective clothing. And we got involved in this because the chairman of our local athletics club in Coventry, Godiva Harriers, was a good friend of a chap I shared my office with, who happened to be the British #1 race walker a few years ago. And they got talking at the track, and the managing director of the company that produces all of this said, oh, we're designing a new suit, we're concerned about the carbon dioxide build-up in the helmet. Can you have a look at that for us at the university? So he came back and asked me if I'd be interested. So we got interested in that, but very quickly on discussing things with them, they started talking about the thermal stress and strain experienced in these sorts of suits. And we could observe the participants that we were using, and we decided to investigate this and see what interventions we could use and apply in the field and understand what's going on. So what we've got here is an uncompensable heat stress situation. This is basically an impermeable garment, bomb disposal suit. It weighs 38 kilograms, okay, so a significant load as well. And even if you sit at rest, after 5 or 6 hours, you'll become hypothermic and you can't thermoregulate. So you will end up passing out. You will end up with a thermal injury. And obviously, we know that as people heat up, they begin to make more mistakes as well, which is a big issue in the field when you're operating with IEDs and the like as well. So what we importantly do there is design protocols to simulate activities in a real setting. And we use real operatives to come to the laboratory to validate those protocols as well. And we've done that for the nuclear industry as well. This is a pressurized breathing air suit, which you feel like a Michelin man when you're in it. It has 200 litres of air pumped into it per minute, because if you're in the nuclear industry working in a decommissioning site, it's often very, very warm as well, 40, 50 degrees. And if this is broken, this suit, the airflow through it actually will push out the particulate radiation rather than contaminate you. That's why it's that positive pressure. But there's a cost associated with that. And we've done studies around shift patterns and shift durations and how long somebody can be exposed in these environments until they begin making too many errors. And it works out to be about 3 hours at an ambient temperature of about 40 degrees undertaking the operations that they undertake and feeding that back in from an ergonomic perspective. And likewise, this is compartment fire behaviour training activity at the MOD in Manston in Kent in the UK, and got involved with them because they used to report that their fire service trainers who were exposed to heat repeatedly throughout the day on intense training activities would report lots of flu-like symptoms. They would be awake at night in hot sweats, experience a lot of lethargy as well, and they referred to this as Manston flu. So what we did is characterise what was happening to them, and I observed the fastest rates of rising core temperature I ever had. We were increasing core temperature by around about a degree in 6 or 7 minutes, and skin surface temperatures in excess of 50 degrees Celsius. These guys are working in these environments, and we're at 250, 300 plus degrees Celsius in these exposures. And obviously that's an important thing to consider. How can we cool these people? Across all of these studies, we've used things like phase change materials on the torso for cooling, on the head for cooling, different combinations to optimize that. We have other issues in that if they're exposed for too long and the phase change material melts and absorbs all of that heat energy, it then becomes insulative. So if they're in a situation where they can't get rid of it, sometimes they're actually better off not wearing it in the first place, dependent upon the duration of what they're up to. So there's lots of sort of practical elements to these sorts of practices and things in there as well. Like I said, I won't talk too much. This is just some of the tests that we use. This is working memory, which is relevant to these guys in service, where they undertake some touchscreen type activities in these activity cycles. And I've got one here as an example. This is the first one that we developed. We have an environment here of 40 degrees Celsius in the laboratory. Okay, this is how we used to do it before we have our, nowadays we have our chamber, but we used to use tents and domestic heaters and things to control the environment. And we've got people here walking at 4 kilometers an hour for a fixed duration, and that's because that translates to 200 meters, which is the average distance an operative would walk in to begin to dispose of an incendiary device. They then undertake manual activity, searching and crawling activities. We would use metronomes and defined distances and ladders on the base, on the floor, marked on the floor in the laboratory, and people would be moving and crawling in fixed times and moving their head at certain points, looking around as they would be doing a search activity. Some arm ergometry, and before we started using the touchscreen based tests, we'd look at tests of manual dexterity. Some of those things would be as simple as putting nuts and bolts together in the early days, and we developed and advanced those as we moved through. So that's just an example of that. And dependent upon the nature of the study, we would need to adopt this protocol. If we were interested in performance, we leave certain elements of this free running. The manual activity, we evolved into moving weights between shelves, and we would record how much people have done. That's fine from a performance perspective. If we're interested in our interventions and how much work they can do, or if it speeds up what they can do. But if our question is based upon the physiological response and thermal strain, if we're making comparisons between conditions, we need the exercise load to be the same. So we then control the rate of that activity. So they're doing exactly the same thing. So we can then compare if our phase change material is cooling in the same way as liquid carbon dioxide cooling air that's being vented into the suit, for example. So a range of different elements there. Yeah, and this is just an example of the sort of responses we'll see. N equals 1 here, just for example. We've got no cooling, we've got a cooling vest, and we've got this dry ice-based cooling system. And for that to operate, we need liquid CO2 available. And it's quite scary to fill these devices as well, because everything freezes. You don't want to fire liquid CO2 on yourself. And obviously, operationally in the field, that is difficult to manage, and also a risk in itself, having liquid CO2 around. And what we did find is with our cooling vest, we actually saw the same magnitude of reduction as using this more technical dry ice-based cooling system. Okay, so that's been sort of moved to the side as a consequence of more extensive work that we did in that area. And we can see we're reducing our core temperature there by over half a degree, you know. And these are at sort of critical temperatures in absolute terms, and that makes an awful lot of difference in relation to somebody's ability to undertake tasks, undertake instruction, relay information, and undertake these sorts of activities in more of a safe, optimal sort of fashion. And a couple of these papers, only very recently, appeared in the US military army guidelines in relation to how the environment should be managed in an EOD situation. So some of this work I actually started doing in 2007, 2008. Some of it was published, presented here, 2009, and then 6 years later, 2015, it's actually getting picked up by the US military and using that in service. So sometimes the lag time on these things can be quite long, as we know. You know, I'm sure we've all got data that we've had for 10 years that we still haven't written up. I certainly have. But there we go. So that's that sort of stuff. And so I combined around that time, in the late sort of 2008, 2009, altitude work, heat work. Started thinking to myself, well, what happens if you make people hot and hypoxic at the same time? You know, it's like, yeah, I like sort of harming people, it sounds like, really, doesn't it, from that point of view, but no. But from a physiological stress point of view, okay, what's the strongest stimulus? And do you get additive stimulus if you expose people to multiple stimuli? Okay, and also the phenomenon of cross-acclimation. So if you acclimatise somebody to the heat, does that actually give them protection if you expose them to another stressor, for example, hypoxia? Okay, because sometimes it's difficult to acclimatise people prior to exposure, and heat's easier to do than making people hypoxic. Okay. So the first study we did in this area, I should highlight Ben Lee here, who's now at the University of Chichester, was my PhD student that undertook a lot of this work on a daily basis. Yeah, we combined, we just basically did an exercise, submaximal exercise test, where we had people either hot, we had them hypoxic, and we had them heat and hypoxia. And we observed what was going on. Okay? And the physiological strain wasn't any greater in heat and hypoxia than it was in the heat. And we chose 40 degrees and we chose 3,000 meters as our values there. In the interest of not taking all afternoon, I'll move on quickly. So we looked at that in an acute setting. And then what we decided to do is address this cross-acclimation phenomenon. So we had people do a test in hypoxia. Okay, I think it was 65–70% of VO2 max pre 3 days of heat acclimation. We then acclimated them to the heat for 3 days, then looked at their response in hypoxia again, yeah, in comparison to a control group. So control group, no changes, but the performance in hypoxia dramatically improved, or the physiological stress, I should say, declined significantly as a consequence of heat acclimation. Right? So we were seeing that, yes, hypoxia is a big stressor, and heat acclimation is actually reducing that magnitude of that stress response significantly so. Right? So then we thought, well, we need to move on here, and we took 3 separate groups of individuals, and we did an acclimation study where we acclimated one group of 10, I think we started with 10 anyway, to hypoxia. We acclimated one group to heat, and we had a control group. And prior to that acclimation, we did our hypoxic test, and as well as our physiological model, where we were getting them to undertake the same amount of work in each condition, we added on a performance test. So they had a time trial afterwards, because we were interested in relation to performance as well as physiology. And yeah, I've got that on there. That's the most viewed paper that I've published, which is a lot of views for any of us in academia. And that was the findings of this study were picked up by sort of Runners World, Men's Health, the networks in America, because basically what we were showing is that if you acclimatize somebody to heat, that what you actually see is as good an adaptation as if you acclimatize them to hypoxia when they're undertaking performance in hypoxia. So basically, in all of Men's Health and stuff, it was a case of, hey, if you're going skiing, guys, go and exercise in a sauna and you'll be on fire when you get to the mountains. You know, but obviously, from a broader standpoint, this has implications for athletes, it has implications for military deployment, it has implications for industry and personnel in extreme environments. You know, for example, high altitude mining that can be hot as well as hypoxia, and preparation in and around that. So the protocol to do this was very detailed, and we wanted to be really secure in that if we did see any performance changes, they were attributed to the environmental stressors and not any sort of habituation or anything. So we've got all of this business down here of preliminary visits and recovery durations and familiarization with time trials. So, you know, our participants were aware of the protocol, so we were measuring real changes. And then we get all the way down here and we've got our 10-day acclimation for these 3 groups that were reasonably well matched. Okay, and they're the ones that we used. And I've sort of told you the results of the study already, but this is actually mean power output pre and post activity, or pre and post acclimation. So post acclimation is the solid lines, pre acclimation power outputs are the open ones, and we can see our control group pre and post, no change. Yeah, we can see here our hypoxic group, yeah, significant improvements, and we can see with our heat group in they're obviously undertaking the same performance test in hypoxia. Yeah, their power outputs are also significantly elevated. Right, this is distribution over time, and what that translated to is that the time trial performance of the group that were acclimatized to hypoxia improved by over 3 minutes, right, in hypoxia, our heat acclimation group improved significantly. Yeah, there was no difference when we compare these groups individually. So the heat acclimation improved their performance in hypoxia to a similar magnitude, which is why everybody picked up on this, and the control no different. So there's some real stuff going on there, which is of interest. And one of the key things here, and this is why some of the basic physiology is of interest, what heat acclimation does, as we all know, it expands plasma volume. So at a given level of exercise, heart rate is reduced because stroke volume is maintained. And what we see, I often use something called a physiological strain index, which is a calculation based upon changes in heart rate and changes in core body temperature, and a combination of those. And this strain index in our control group didn't change in hypoxia pre and post. In our hypoxic group, it didn't change between pre and post. But in our heat group, it was reduced post. And that was due to a reduction in heart rate in our hot group in hypoxia of almost 10 beats per minute. Right? So our adaptation to the heat at a cardiovascular level, cardiovascular strain level, was actually better than adaptation to hypoxia in subsequent hypoxic activity, which is really interesting. So I've got a guy at the moment who's just gone off to Everest, and he was doing some hypoxic acclimation before, but he was also doing some stuff in the heat, because it's just as value added in a lot of ways. And some of this work, we've looked at a molecular level as well, when we measure things like heat shock proteins, where we can directly look at cellular tolerance. Heat shock proteins, in broad terms, are sort of molecular chaperones. They look after the proteins in cells and protect them. And it's a bit of a leap of faith, but it's used as an index of cellular tolerance. And we're measuring this in PBMCs, which are peripheral blood mononuclear cells in white blood cells, as an index of what's going on in the tissue. Because sadly, we would like to, we couldn't take any muscle biopsies or anything like that. And what we did see is that if we just look at the fold change in rest before our hypoxic tests, where we've got our acclimation in the middle, right? Our control group, there was no difference, as you would expect, okay? And our hypoxic acclimation group and our heat acclimation group, yeah, their heat shock protein content increased, as you would expect, due to the acclimation, okay? At rest, so the basal levels are higher, more protection there, more tolerance there. And we also see that during exercise, and if we look at the white bar and the darker bar, this is the response after the acclimation, and we can see that the greatest rise or the greatest change in the heat shock protein across that exercise bout is in the control group, okay? Because they're being exposed to hypoxia in that period, whereas these guys aren't increasing their heat shock protein production in that stress because it's high already, because we've already brought it up there. It's one of those things I've had to sit in a dark room and think about before to get my head around. But basically, you've got the adaptation there already, so when you respond, you don't need to produce or upregulate the heat shock protein expression anymore to that extent. And broadly, we're interested in various combinations of altitude and hypoxia, what the level of stimulus could be and should be, what's the time course of adaptation, how long does the beneficial effect last for, you know, and obviously there's knock-on effects in relation to clinical preconditioning, heating people and exposing people prior to, you know, surgery, trauma, you know, management, and all of those sorts of issues around that as well. And yeah, this paper, amongst other things, this is a bit of an advert here. This is a view online nowadays, and we've just had a special edition of Frontiers and a guest editorial, and we've got, I think it's about 10 papers in a special edition all around cross-acclimation, which is an interesting thing. And I'm still surprised to this very day that when I started thinking about cross-acclimation and I was searching for papers and people that might have done these things before with whole body humans, there weren't any. You know, which was really surprising because I was thinking, why on earth have people not looked at multiple stressors? And it's one of those points where you're thinking, I'm missing a trick here, and somewhere there's a massive literature that I've missed, and it just didn't exist, which is useful from that perspective. Right. Anyway, right. How am I doing for time? So I know I've gone for it. Have we got 5 minutes or? Yeah. Is that okay? Yeah. So we'll change tack on that. Last little bit. So from altitude and heat, now I'm going to talk about altitude and cold. Right. So randomly, again, as some of these things happen, got involved in undertaking some work where people were traversing the Antarctic. Okay. And a couple of years ago now, this was over 2016 into 2017, the links at the university hospital where they have a human metabolic research unit. So we have some rooms where people can go into them, they can stay in there for days, and we can measure quite closely their metabolism. We can increase or decrease the temperature and look at their metabolic response to that. We can measure them through sleep. We can measure them in light exercise and all of those sorts of things. So we had these guys before they went off, their SAS Army Reserves, before they went off to traverse the Antarctic, they came to the hospital and they spent 36 hours in the facility. And then after that, they come to me, to the environmental chamber, and people have looked at changes in fitness across these sort of expeditions before, but what they've not done is actually look at what their response is in hypoxia pre and post too. Because even though you know, the plateau is getting on for 3,000 meters, it surprised me to find that people were only looking at normoxic exercise pre and post. So we look at normoxic as well as hypoxic exercise pre and post. And that can give us some interesting insights there as well. So these guys went off and did this. This is them before they went. And this is them when they came back. Slight change. Yeah, they deliberately put on mass beforehand because they knew that they'd be at a calorie deficit. They ingested, getting on for 7,000 kilocalories a day. Okay, and they had, it was really prescribed nutrition, right? And they were ingesting a higher proportion of carbohydrate than people had done so in the past as well. And impressively, their muscle mass was relatively well maintained. They only lost 2 to 3 kilograms of muscle across this expedition that was in excess of 60 days. And they were obviously working at a calorie deficit for that to be induced, and a lot more lean as a consequence. There were 6 originally. One of them only made it to the South Pole and was quite weak in relative terms before that, and had to go back. And ironically, he was the participant that responded the worst to the exercise tests in hypoxia before they left. And I'll mention now, because I might forget as we go through, the ladies that have just done this, similar expedition, the one that responded the worst to altitude was also the one that became ill on the ice and struggled the most and was helped out the most, but they all managed to make it through to the end. So the reduction in somebody's ability to undertake work at altitude seems to be predictive, as you might expect, because you're working harder than everybody else. If you're keeping up with everybody else and you've got less oxygen in your blood, you're not ventilating as well, you're more hypoxic, you're fatiguing more, you know, that window of opportunity is larger to link a few things together and all sorts of things. So we've got these guys there, yeah. So you're looking at, they consumed over 2 million kilocalories in this expedition, which is pretty immense from that perspective. So what happened with their exercise responses? I'm just going to show you the top line. That's where it's at. VO2 max. These guys did their exercise tests on an ergometer, on a cycle ergometer. Ideally, I wanted them on foot, on a treadmill, but they obviously didn't want to risk injury. because they'd been training for over a year in order to do this. And a lot of their training consists of pulling massive tractor tyres tied to their waists around, because they were unsupported, and they pulled sledges with everything that they needed for the expedition in it. It was unsupported. So when they started, their pulks, their sledges were weighing 80 kilograms as well, which they were pulling. And they were moving on the ice for 10 to 12 hours a day, and then setting up camp, sorting themselves out, and going again. So pretty amazing stuff from that point of view. But we see normoxic, VO2 max, this is, pre to post on a cyclogometer, just a small reduction. Okay? But what was of interest, that I wasn't entirely expecting, is that their maximum in hypoxia increased. Okay? So this is interesting from the point of view, how have you got a situation where under normoxic conditions your VO2 max is declining, yet in hypoxia it's increasing? Which is interesting in relation to the regulatory side of things in particular, isn't it? Amongst many, many other things. So there's lots of questions around that. Obviously the muscle has the capacity to use oxygen at a higher level if it were available, but something is changing to demonstrate the effect there in hypoxia. Obviously myoglobin will increase in the muscle, shuttling, so on and so forth, but there's going to be other factors there contributing to that. A lot of other information there as well we won't talk about. So yeah, exercise ice maidens. Because we've done this work, with Spear 17 we wanted to make a lot more measurements, but the MOD didn't want us to, and it was too late in the day. So we wanted to plan more for when the ladies went. And to an extent we were able to do that, and we collaborated with some scientists in the MOD and in Edinburgh in order to undertake a bigger study, and this is all around UK military using females in frontline combat and needing to understand physiological responses of females in extreme situations more in depth, and of course the reproductive axis as well, that can be harmed sometimes and can't be recovered in extreme situations too. So yeah, this link is on there. If any of you guys ever want to have a look, it's got me in the lab talking about what's going on and some of the ice maidens doing the exercise. We won't watch that today. This paper's just been published in MedSci. I'm only in the middle here because I lead on the exercise side of things. But what we found in general here, that there were slight reductions in the female reproductive axes when they were out on the ice, but that recovered within 15 days of them coming off the ice. So this is just transient, and they were back to normal. And it's one of those papers as well, their bone health and markers of bone turnover, that was all normalised within a couple of weeks after the expedition, and it didn't change so much either. And nutrition again was key, because these ladies were consuming just under 5,000 kilocalories a day as well. They put on extra fat mass beforehand as well, deliberately. And when they came back, some of them were complaining that they hadn't lost as much as they thought they would, so they took on too much reserve. But the absolute difference here, because in the early 90s we would hear about people like Ranulph Fiennes and Mike Stroud doing expeditions across the Antarctic and emaciating themselves and losing 10-15 kilograms of muscle mass, and fitness going through the floor and being in absolute pieces. But their diet was different. They weren't consuming enough calories, and they were predominantly ingesting fat, not carbohydrate. So obviously, as we know, protein is going to supplement blood glucose in an extreme, relatively starvation, high energy turnover scenario. So the difference nowadays with these guys is absolutely the nutrition. The number of calories they're ingesting, the fact that they're loading up in advance and increasing their body mass to combat their deficit. So yeah, interesting stuff, but it's one of those things, yeah, we measured a load of things, but nothing really changed, which is really good and a positive finding, and demonstrates that the ladies are at least as robust as the men, probably more so, which we all knew anyway, really, didn't we, from that perspective. So the exercise bit that we did, pre and post expedition, we used with the ladies a treadmill-based protocol where we were looking at lactate threshold and we were then ramping them up quickly. And we can do that in normoxia and hypoxia. We've done a lot of work in the past which shows that if you leave an hour to recover between normoxic and hypoxic maximal tests with a reasonably well-trained person on the same day, you can do those back to back, and you don't see any differences as if you did those on different days and things like that. A lot of that in the past. And again, we'll just highlight the VO2 max values for these ladies here. Pre and post, small decline in normoxia. Obviously the absolute term values are smaller, and we did see a small reduction in hypoxia in the ladies. So that wasn't the same as with the men, but these are low end numbers as well, you know, 6 in each group. So we're continuing to look at that. We've got a paper submitted to JAP at the moment, which is looking at the metabolic stuff in the chamber, pre and post. Globally, that didn't change too much, but it appears that the ladies are metabolizing fats differently in hypoxia after the expedition compared to beforehand, which is of interest. And ironically, their fat metabolism or their maximal fat oxidation is actually declined post-expedition in hypoxia. And it's not changed at all under normoxic conditions. So that's of interest to tease out what's going on there, or is that artifact? So we've got some interesting things happening that we don't fully understand, to be honest there. And is that because of the relative high carbohydrate diet, because of the continuous exposure to hypoxia, and the fact that using carbohydrate is more energy efficient in a hypoxic environment, and being exposed to that sort of thing chronically. The other thing, in the metabolic chamber, we also saw post-expedition that when the ladies were fed, they preferentially metabolized the carbohydrate in a different way to what they were doing pre-expedition. So there's something to do with hypoxia interacting with the macronutrient preference in muscle that, yeah, is yet to be fully appreciated from that perspective. So yeah, that's just bits and pieces on the same. This is fat oxidation, pre and post, and we can see this red line as exercise intensity increases in the lower domain. Yeah, that fat oxidation at lower intensities is reduced post expedition for those reasons. So there's lots of information there around that. That's a summary of really what I've just said, so I won't repeat that. Just to finish, currently this lady, she was in the laboratory a couple of weeks back. She's just about to embark on a world record attempt to be the fastest lady to get to the South Pole, Jenny, and she was front page in Times2 the other week, and if anyone reads it, I'm heavily misquoted in there. I'd like to think I know more about physiology than I apparently do. You know what journalists are like, they just chop up whatever it is that you're saying to make it sound better. But that's in there, and that's, yeah, training with tyres and things like that. Yeah, so she's actually a lawyer by trade, but also does a lot and has a big history of being an endurance athlete, competing in all sorts of areas. The interesting thing about Jenny as well is that she is on a keto diet. Okay, so her body is chronically adapted in that perspective to high fat. So that's going to be an interesting one to see how she responds, and maybe that will give us some insight into what we've seen happening already. But in saying that, we have also tried to increase her carbohydrate intake on this attempt. And it's a different scenario too, because she's wanting to shift and get there as quick as she possibly can. And the record for a lady at the moment is 34 days to get to the South Pole. And she's looking to break that. And in preparation for that, she's actually scaled the highest mountain in the Antarctic last week, You can see her online. She's on Instagram, Twitter, whatever else. See what she's getting up to. That's interesting. When she was in the lab the other week, she came in. She'd been in the chamber overnight. We started on the exercise protocol on the treadmill. And after a bit, she said, she was waving, and I stopped her and I was thinking, oh no, what's going on here? And she said, oh, I've been having this problem, you know, sort of shin splints. And I said, oh, right, okay. We need to have a think about this. And then she divulged to me, actually, she said to me, is this room, can people hear outside of this room? Because there were media around and stuff. I said, no, no. She said, I've actually got a fractured tibia, and I don't want the media to know about it because it might affect my sponsorship for this attempt and all of the money that's being raised for charity. Okay, right, so we need to stop doing this in that case. And she's, yeah, but, you know, I've not run on it for about 3 or 4 weeks, and I was hoping it was going to be better today. I've just been doing this light loading. And she says to me, I'm not worried about the pain. Okay. And she said, the pain's not an issue. If I've got function, I can get around the pain. And that's an insight into the mentality of people that do this sort of thing. And she then told me that she once ran 200 kilometres in a race with a broken foot. So we're talking about people at the extreme end of the spectrum here, psychologically, to be able to handle what they do, which is always of interest to me, those people. So we decided that we were going to sack it off that day. Jenny went back to London, and she came back the following week, and we did the protocol, but on a cycloergometer, because we obviously didn't want to load that tibialis anterior and the tibia, and that seemed to work okay. So we've got all the pre-data. Hopefully she'll be in one piece when she comes back, and yeah, we'll see about the bone side of things. But from the Ice Maiden data, that's also useful to know that on a good diet, even at that level of activity, a bone turnover is going to be maintained at the very least, and then recover afterwards. Yeah, always interested in these old people. And final slide, just again an advert. We've recently put together something called the Global Polar and Altitude Metabolic Research Registry, which is based at the University Hospital under Professor Chris Imray, who's also interested in high altitude, as part of this collaboration. And basically what we're doing here on all different levels, we're recording what happens to people when they go to these extreme environments. And that can be as basic as weighing them pre and post. It can be as basic as them keeping some records themselves pre and post and sending us information. Or it can be as technical as actually getting people into the metabolic unit for 36 hours, and then to me for the closer studies. So on one level, we're looking at citizens on science, anybody who's going, and we can make some small measures on them to feed into the database, and some individuals, the full array of measures. And en masse, that might be able to inform us of all sorts of things. So that was a small grant from the Everest Foundation that's funding getting this registry off the ground, and we'll see what happens with that. So yeah, that's just a garbled overview of the broad range of sorts of things that we get up to, or I get up to. So yeah, thanks for bearing with that. And you guys, if you don't know about any of those things, will probably hear some more about some of those things when you have your physiology module next term. So yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for this amazing talk. That's amazing. No words. Actually, I have 1,000 questions for you.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant.
But I think we have.
We can talk over.
Yes. Just one question before.
Yeah.
Have to check the effect of the heat acclimatation and oxygen using a strange protocol. I mean, using a, I think you mentioned treadmills and cycloergometers and endurance tests.
Yeah.
Have you measured the effect of this oxygen strength training?
On strength training?
Using strange protocol.
Strength ones?
Strength.
Yeah, I'm being hesitant there. No. And it's something that we've been interested in looking at, and some master's students are toying with that from the whole point of view of yeah, whole body strength training in a hypoxic environment, and looking at the metabolic or the additional metabolic stress and the subsequent adaptation around that. No, I've actually got a master's student who's yet to, they've only just submitted a proposal, and they're looking at doing some strength training in our environmental chamber at 3,000 meters. We've done some work before on ischemic exercise, blood flow restriction of the thighs and of the arms, and obviously hypoxia and ischemia are slightly different. Some crossover between that, but of course with the cuffs, you're only isolating peripheral muscles, and you're not getting that whole body effect either. But it's certainly an area of interest, and there isn't that much done on there, but there's some evidence to indicate that it's beneficial from a loading perspective.
Yeah, a lot of fields that could be benefit from this heat acclimatization, such as maybe the injury rehabilitation and other fields. Hypoxia, heat, big field to try to
And I suppose with that, that's really interesting, because if you have got someone undergoing rehab and they're still healing, with those additional stressors, you know, if you are increasing the cellular tolerance, how is that interacting with the tissue reconstruction, I suppose, as well?
And the effect of this on cardiorespiratory coordination as well.
Definitely. Yeah. As with most things, it opens up even more of a can of worms, doesn't it, as we go on. But yeah, no, absolutely, that's very interesting. You're not going to ask me anything.
In relation to cardiovascular.
Yeah.
No. I will have plenty of questions that are related about cardiovascular system, but I think that you're starving maybe.
Yeah.
Because it's too late.
Yeah. They have to listen to me all the time. They don't.
No, we can discuss it during the lunch if you want, because I'm really interested in if the effects in the cardiovascular system are permanent or not, and if you think that it can be used to treat some diseases related to the cardiovascular system, or maybe immune system, as you mentioned before.
Yeah, most.
If you have a short answer, fine. If not, we can discuss.
Yeah, no.
So
the short answer is yes. There are a few studies that look at hypoxia and in various disease states, and using hypoxia as a treatment in order to, you know, enhance responses in that area. And we're hoping to have a PhD student start who's going to be looking at obesity and the interaction with hypoxic training and obesity and satiety and that sort of area, and maybe in relation to, you know, diabetes as well, and how hypoxia is interacting and regulating there. But all of that stuff is in early days. There is a nice review paper that is actually in Frontiers, actually, so it's available, where the work clinically in that area has been pulled together, giving an overview of what's known around using hypoxia as a treatment. Conceptually, it's an interesting one, because obviously some of these diseases result in people being chronically hypoxic anyway, which is, how different is that to making somebody more hypoxic than they already are, you know, and is it repeated acute exposures with adequate time off in between so there's no adaptation to maintain the strain, or is it quick repeat exposures so you get adaptation, you know, or chronicity, which is a different question, I suppose. So you asked for a short answer, and these guys, I just go on. So yeah, no, but we can talk about that more. But yeah, absolutely, yeah, ongoing. scared. I'll try and keep this one to a sentence, and we'll see if I actually can.
Sorry, well, I have no question, but to thank you very much for,
That's great.
for your presentation and for the information provided. For me, I'm, let's say that my area of expertise is quite far away from it, but I really understood and enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. That's lovely, thank you.
Okay, so if you want, we'll go to the cafeteria to have lunch. If that's okay, yeah? A well-deserved lunch.